Hey, welcome everybody. It's Micro Frontends Meetup time. I'm your host, Florian Rappel, and I'm back from my vacation. So this is not your screen gone mad or anything. I'm actually a little bit darker than usual. First beach vacation in 7 years for me. So software development doesn't fit me well, but I'm happy that now I have at least some vacation. Great. So we have some really nice stuff today. Don't want to waste any time. But before that, we have, well, usual agenda we need to talk about a bit. So with that in mind, let's just jump right through it. As you know, this session is recorded and will be available on YouTube. The URL that you now access the live stream with is also the URL you can access the video recording later on. If there is anything, that you don't want there, then don't use the chat, for instance, because that will be part of, the recording. Therefore, please use other channels, right? Also, if you participate in the chat, please always, follow our code of conduct. In short, just be nice, right? Don't do any harassment or anything. Personal attacks will not be tolerated. So again, just form a well community. We also try our best to foster that. Now, one more thing, that's always the deal, right? This content lives here because of you, of the community. So if you have anything to talk about, if you also want to be in the show or know someone where you say, oh, I really want to see this person talking about micro frontends, then please reach out to us. For instance, via, my LinkedIn account, just write me. There's also, other channels that you can reach us. But whatever channel you prefer to, you can also, for instance, use the YouTube chat, of course. Just get in touch with us if you want to see somebody in the show, or if you have content that you want to present yourself. We always like to know about it, and we always, of course, really want to see you guys. Finally, last time we announced the state of micro frontends, that's still ongoing. Anyone who already participated in there, much appreciated so far. If you still want to participate, I left it open since I just came back today from my vacation. I had no time to already start the evaluation. But I will try to conclude that maybe next week or so. So please still contribute. Everyone who participates in there, highly appreciate, and it just reflects better what's going on in the world of micro frontends. I think everyone benefits from that. So all the data will be made available to everyone. So please contribute. Finally, one advertisement I want to speak about is we also have some workshops going on. We already had one in July, and now the next one is coming up, I think next week or the week after. I don't know. I think it's next week. But anyway, on this website, you can find out what we planned so far, what we have in terms of content, and how you can reach out to us if you want to have maybe your own content or so presented there. All right, now let's get this thing rolling. Actually, I want to start with Manuel here, who is a software engineer from our own company, Smapiot. Hey, Manuel.
Hi.
Hi. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, besides that you are a full stack software engineer specialized in developing backends with .NET and micro frontends using React?
Well, let me try at least. So first of all, unfortunately, I'm not as dark as you. I spent the last week here in the basement, in the dark, preparing for this meetup today. Brought a demo for you guys. And if you're interested about portal development and how they relate to micro frontends, especially in the area of micro frontend discovery, then, that is going to be my topic today. And I hope you will learn something new today. Apart from that, like Florian already said, I did a lot of backend development initially when I joined Smapiot, .NET Stack. I love C#, did that for a long time. But then I kind of was forced to transition into this micro frontend area, which I didn't even know anything about when I joined the company. Partly also because Florian was not at Smapiot at that point in time. But it has been growing on me. And I think what I can bring to the table here in this, let's say, round is that my perspective on micro frontends is maybe not from like a micro frontend guru, those architects who design the entire architectures, who bring all the wisdom in the world into books. I'm more or less a normal developer here who uses micro frontends, who likes them, but let's say has a more traditional perspective, a more generalized perspective on them. And I hope to kind of cover this in today's demonstration.
Great, and I think this perspective is also very valuable because one thing that we also crafted out, I think, in the last meetup was that while micro frontends, of course, add some layer of complexity, they also remove a layer. And I think, especially from the point of view of a developer, it should, I mean, advantages should be clear. And I mean, usability in terms of development should also make sense. So therefore, I think this will be highly informative. Thanks so far. Let's take up our next guest, who is an Angular front-end tech lead of Oxygen TS from France, Fatima. Hey.
Thanks for having me. So I'm Fatima Mzil. I'm a cross-functional front-end technical leader. I have a lot of activities beyond my work life. I'm a technical writer at Medium and mentor at My Job Glasses and also an Angular DDE. I share some few stories on YouTube too, and I have 3 little cute cats. They are not here, but yeah, I'm a mother of 3 super cute cats. So yeah, I'm currently working on the Calypso program, which is managed by the ASP in French, which is Service and Payment Agency. It's a public organization that manages France payments. One of its goals is to provide allowances to citizens in various domains, such as employment, agriculture, innovation, society, culture, etc. So just to give you a small story behind the Calypso program, it resides in the COVID period, which is not something we like. So yeah, it resides behind the COVID period where there were a lot of people who stopped working, like people working in restaurants, for example. So the French government provided several allowances to their citizens, so to help them and avoid employers firing employees because there is no work actually. So since there are a lot of domains touched by COVID, there was high volume of requests by citizens and a lot of fraud too, because everyone wants allowances and wants like to take benefits of the opportunity. So the existing system showed a lot of limitations in handling all this. So there is where the government decided to build and invest in an efficient system called the Calypso program. And it has mainly 2 goals. The first one is to respond to the vast majority of user requests, address their eligibility for a specific allowances, for example, provide general assistance through highly accessible systems. And the second goal is to develop a comprehensive automated system, streamlining the entire process. With the system in place, newly announced allowances, regardless of the domain, whatever if it's culture, agriculture, whatever it is, the goal is to be quickly available, make the allowance available to citizens, and minimize the time to market. So when the government announce, for example, an allowance to its citizens, it should be available in a few days. So the ambition of the Calypso program is to be able to make things automatic, to generate forms, to generate screens, and so to have quickly the form so that the citizen can go and make a request for the allowance, etc. And there are a lot of things going on there, but that's just the general idea, general picture.
Okay.
So yeah.
Great. And I mean, this is a very ambitious project, right?
Yes.
From the timeline, is this already rolled out, or in what stage is this currently?
We are really in the early stages of Calypso program. It's from scratch. It started by December 2022, so we haven't yet gone to production. So we are really on the early stage. So we are building our baby, let's say.
Okay. And any from the timeline, anything clear when you want to go live? Is there anything set already where you say, well, end of, I don't know, 2023 already, or somewhere in 2024, or is when you're ready, you're ready?
Yes, it will be by the beginning of 2024, I think. I will have the first version, the first MVP. But like you said, it's an ambition project. There are a lot of people working there, a lot of teams. So yeah, it's for the 2024.
Okay, great. Now, I mean, since of course some Micro Frontend Meetup, right? So we could of course talk now about how many requests and backend stuff here, but from the frontend perspective, what have you chosen there as a stack, and how do you now want to? You mentioned the many teams and the fast time to market. How do you want to tackle that?
Will we all use Angular? That's great because I'm a lover of Angular. So yeah, we all use Angular since it's from scratch. So we have the same same base. Every team has her own repository, basically an Angular classical and traditional application, and every team is isolated. She has its own application, CI/CD, like transparent. So yeah, every product or every domain, it's really isolated. And in terms of backend, we opted for domain-driven design. So like there are a lot of microservices, etc.
Okay. And is there are there full stack teams, or how they employed, right? Where you say, okay, we got now microservices, so this is already really nicely formed in subdomains, and one team covers a subdomain, etc. But it does this transport to the front end as well, or how is this handled from the team split?
Yes, well, actually, there is not front-end team. Each team like work on front-end and the back-end. I'd say it's domain-driven, but there are some teams who are cheating. Like we have subdomains. So yeah, but we in general, each team has a domain. For example, we have a team for administration, configuration, and OS settings. This team is responsible for generating forms, like generating screens, like things like that. Things manage administration configuration. There is a team that works on individual citizen information to make sure that we have one source of truth and there are not citizens who are duplicated and asking 2 times for an allowance. So yeah, there are another team for accounting and payments. So it controls all these operations. So to make sure we avoid any fraud activities, things like that, and see if the citizen is paid, how much, and follow if there is any errors and things like that. There's also a team for allowance, a specific allowance. So it manages. So the manager, when he got a call from a citizen, he can see the status of his like a request, see the payment, see all details it need, if there is any document needed, and things like that.
All right. I mean, you mentioned independent deployments and all that. Now, quite often when I hear, projects for the government, I always hear also regulatory, and I hear a lot of processes. So I wonder, does it impact these, of course, still independent, but these processes that, different applications? I mean, of course, since it's not productive yet, I imagine that some of these things are maybe still unknown or to be discussed and all that. At least that's what I usually witness in many projects, right? That are in regulated industries where we figured it out on the way, right? And I mean, this is not a bad approach, but maybe you know already something, you know, how teams will deal with that, you know, or is it not strongly regulated? What's there at the moment? Maybe the water temperature.
You mean in terms of independence and CI/CD?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of regulatory issues. So, for instance, I mean, as an example, one application that I joined is in a medical environment, and they have also independent teams. However, when they enter a certain market, there is, of course, always some, well, let's say, checklist that they need to pass through. And what quite often then happens is, even though all the pipelines, everything technically is independent, they still come together because they need to have these checklists, these boxes checked, right? So they need to go through them step by step, and you can't just say, well, they will deploy another day. So, but you need to present them one application, one state, so to speak, at this time, right? You need to say, well, all these pipelines now pass through. Every team that didn't go through all the pipelines, well, they didn't enter now this stage, so they need to wait until the next time we make, I don't know, some approved market entering thing, or I don't know, right? And that's what I wonder working with governments, because I usually also hear that they also are quite fond of processes and, you know, checklists, and therefore they also usually are a little bit of counteracting this. Well, they are independent teams and they do what they want. They say, no, this is what you bring to this whole application, right? Show me now, what is in there, right? And that's where I'm going, right? So how much does regulatory or processes that are already there impact or might impact this application, or can you anticipate?
Well, for now we are still in our like first steps. We have some processes, but really each team is independent. Each one deploys whenever he wants. Each one like tests. We like do demos on like we start sprint same date. We do demos same date, but there is not really any process when we are going to integrate all micro frontends to the whole to the container or the Calypso portal. Here, I think there will be checklists. There will be a lot of of checklists actually. But now we are really in early stages, and yeah, we don't have we like just integrated one first micro frontend, and we are checking experimenting things, etc. So for now, it's not yet complicated, but it's coming.
Okay, all right. Good. So then let's say integration of micro frontends. I think you compared different approaches. Do you have maybe something that you can show us here, what you compared and maybe what you settled at this point in time already?
Yeah, so we have, I'd like first to share
the screen. Sorry.
Yes.
Technical details, right?
Yes, sorry about that.
All good, all good.
Is that okay now?
Yes.
Perfect. So yeah, we have mainly two approaches. The first one is let's start with what my client needs. So the global need is I want one entry point, the Calypso portal. So I go there and I have access to all functionalities depending on my rule and my habilitations. So this is the need. So this is what we want to do. We have several teams, so we need to respect this factor or this requirement. Each team is independent, is extremely isolated, etc. So this is why we opted for micro frontends. So either we go for one team and one application, traditional application, or respect the organizational structure with different teams. So we have two approaches. The first one is having like portal here, and in the portal I can call the IMIFO's micro frontends, and on runtime load micro frontend, and so on for each micro frontend. Here I have the first micro frontend, second, and the third, and this is in a monorepo solution. Another solution is having multi-repositories, which is our case today. Each team has its own repository, so we need to, it's a little bit complicated because it's not like in monorepo, everything is managed in the same place, we share the same base, we update all together, etc. I can share later the advantages and disadvantages of this approach. But anyway, today's approach, we decided to go for micro frontend architecture with multi repositories. Each team is independent, manages its own repository. This is the first team that manages all the administration stuff. The second team that manages the not a specific allowance. Another team that manages individual information, etc. And here I have my portal where I can load on runtime a micro frontend.
Great. I mean, I like the multi-repository approach because it's always, just a superset of the monorepo. You can always, use a monorepo, but if you can multi-repo this, then you truly won, because that means you can onboard also teams where you say they shouldn't have access for whatever reason to this, I don't know, main repository, let's call it, or where I have the code of the app shell, or maybe some of the other micro frontends, right? And that's always an advantage, because that means you can externalize certain functionality. And you mentioned the time to market, right? So it's quite important to cover these aspects.
Yes, it's an important point, indeed. Well, in our case, we absolutely need to keep each team with its own repository. The main factor, or the main reason why we have this, is that first, the client wants to be able to entrust the application when it's stable, like in maintenance phase, and we are just maintaining the system and adding some new functionalities. He wants to entrust this application with different service companies. So if I have one monorepo, I can't do that. So there won't be different companies. I just have to give the monorepo project to one company. So this is one of the reasons. Another reason is that the monorepo is not beginner front-end developers friendly. I mean, we need first to know about Angular, how it works, etc., before going to a monorepo approach with a lot of teams. In our case, we have a lot of beginner developers, front-end developers, some developers who never have done Angular before. So it's a little bit risky to go for a monorepo. We have libraries, we share libraries, so any change on a library can impact another team. So even though we can put some boundaries, like for each micro frontend, it's still risky for our case. So this is one of the reason too we opted for the multi-repo approach. And although I know multi-repo is not really that sexy, I don't like it either, to be honest, but there is you need to externalize libraries each update, we need to update to publish a new version and say to all teams, hey, a new version is here and you can get your new component or whatever it is. So there's a lot of management to do, state management too. It's complicated actually to go for a multi-repo approach, but yeah, it's there is no perfect solution, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course. I mean, there are always just trade-offs, right? One thing, of course, that crossed my mind is, and that's, of course, one of the challenges that usually comes with the multi-repo is, now, let's say you're one of these teams. I mean, I, of course, don't know what's behind all the abbreviations, but let's call AEF now Team A, and you want to run and debug your application already running in this portal, right? Can you do that locally, or do you need to deploy that already to some environment to do that, or how could you do that?
If the team wants to deploy its own application, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, in order for me, so let's say I'm a developer on this team, and as you said, I mean, these are independent applications. However, of course, they will run at the end of the day in the context of this portal, right? And I assume that the portal comes with, I don't know, maybe some navigation layer and things already in place. So the question, of course, is if I run this application locally, does it already run in the context of this portal? I don't know, with a navigation layer, etc. Or would it just be, let's say, the content of one page and I only see this naked content? Or how would I go as a developer to see this thing already running? Do I need to deploy it already? I mean, that's in short.
Well, actually, for each merge request, we automatically deploy on, for example, developer environment. So automatically we can check our updates on the environment. It depends on the environment, but automatically we can check our updates, since whenever we click, for example, on the menu for Micro Frontend 1, we will load on runtime an application which is already running somewhere. So it's really independent. It's deployed independently. So yes, as a developer, we can check right away. Of course, we have to have the both Micro Frontend and portal deployed.
Okay, so I need to merge it in first, and I can see it in the context. Before it, I can only see it, let's say, standalone, right?
Yes.
Okay. Right, then one question from the chat from Nicolas. Why do you choose Angular instead of React?
Well, when I came to this project, it was already chosen, let's say. And actually, there are a lot of reasons. Maybe because Angular is already is friendly with big applications. There is already a structure we have from the beginning. We know how it works in Angular, but it's not actually my choice. It's already something that is decided before.
Okay. And from the version perspective, do the teams need to settle on a specific version, maybe just a major version? And what version have you picked so far? Is it like Angular 16 already, or is it maybe something before?
Yes, for now it's 15. It's not yet 16. We are going 16 maybe by the end of this year, or beginning of 2024. We, of course, it's important to keep our Angular version updated each time there is a new version. And the challenge here is that we have per team a repository. So you can see that this is a limitation of a multi-repo approach. If we were on a monorepo solution, we can update one time for everyone, but for now, yeah, we do it for each team.
But I suppose you still then share Angular, right? So that, for instance, if every team is using Angular 15 in whatever minor version, right, you will then consolidate that at runtime, I suppose, and say, we picked then Angular 15, I don't know, and the latest one of Angular 15 that any one of these brings with them, right? And then you just have Angular running once. That's at least the goal, right? So.
Yes, actually it depends because we use a module federation plugin, and the plugin computes behind the scenes, like which version, if there is conflicts, and it manages this. For our case, since they are all projects from scratch, so of course we have the same base, and we are we have in perspective to always migrate at the same time. But it's possible to like one team it doesn't update right way Angular, so we will end up with a difference of version. But module federation manage this. He computes, or it computes the most version compatible version for all apps, and if not found, then we will end up with two versions on the bundle.
Okay, great. All right, then one more question that is on my mind is, does the portal know these micro frontends? Because I mean, here it seems a little bit like there are direct arrows going from inside the portal to the micro frontend. So it seems to know already some fragments that there might be a micro frontend, or is there maybe something like a discovery service in between where you can say, well, the portal doesn't know anything, but this discovery service gathers the information, what micro frontends are there, and then the portal can use that information to load the micro frontends.
Well, the portal knows because we provide a configuration in the Webpack, and there we say that like we have this micro frontend and this one and this one, and same goes for micro frontends. They expose their like remote model to all application who want to consume it. So the portal is aware, but we don't load all micro frontends. It's really it depends on first on the user rights. Maybe he won't be able to see, for example, this micro frontend because he doesn't have the right to see it and to load it. So it's based on the like if he should or he has habilitations to see or to load the micro frontends. And only when we click on the micro frontend, we'll go and load its remote module GS file.
Cool. But of course, that means if you onboard a new team, you will need to deploy a new version of the portal, right? Because when they come with a new micro frontend, you need to make the portal aware of it.
Yes, of course. If we have a new micro frontend and we want to use it, we need to update the Webpack configuration, actually, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Manuel, do you have any question? Because we also don't have any more questions from the chat. It was just this one question. But if you guys have any more questions in the chat, just post it right now. You can, of course, always deal with it in the discussion round. And so far, really great insights. Thanks, Fatima.
Welcome.
I mean, I have one question, but I don't know if I just missed it. But I was curious, how many teams are we talking about, and what team sizes do you guys have?
Good
question. Is it like 100 teams, 1,000 people, or?
Well, I think it will be 100. Maybe I haven't I haven't counted, but we actually now we have 4 teams, and we just started with one specific allowance. So you see, when we have new allowances, so there will be new teams. So now we are 5 teams. Team per product, and there's a global team where I belong actually, which is the system team, where we put the main structure, the main architecture. We lead the choices, architecture choices, and lead the way.
Cool.
So we have like 100 people in total, not per team then, right?
Yes, of course, in total.
Okay.
For team, that would be
I was scared
that
for a
would
second
be
here.
I mean,
that's
there
scary.
are companies that have sizes like that, right? I mean, doesn't make
Per
them more
team?
efficient, but yeah,
Per
why
team?
not?
Okay, I haven't
Per
heard
team,
about that
yeah,
before.
there are some large companies out there that show a lot of. I mean, it's not only
Wow.
developers then, of course, right? That's maybe one more question that I have, right? Do you have a designer on each team? Or do you have a
Uh,
designer that is for everything responsible? I mean,
this is a big
one
challenge, you
designer
know.
means design team, maybe potentially. I don't know, right? So one
User
designer doesn't need to
experience,
be
one
one complete.
UX. You mean one UX
Yes, let's say dedicated UX
for?
resource for each team, whatever resource means, right? Could be 2 or 3 people, I don't care, but is there someone dedicated for
We
each
have a
team?
team. We have a
Okay,
dedicated team for that, and that's a big challenge because we need to make sure that we have the same thing per app, so that we feel that we have there is no big differences. So yes, we have a team just for that, but it's not a
okay,
product team, so it didn't count it.
all right. Yeah, but I mean,
Are
that's
you
okay. It's also a very usual case, right? And I've seen a lot of projects that the UI UX is central. And I mean, there's nothing bad about it, but of course there are pros and cons. And Michael Gers would of course argue that doesn't make your microphones really deep. It should have a dedicated resource, but I rarely see this, really rarely. And I mean, there are not only pros of
Uh,
that, and
yes,
besides, of course, having a
but
full
and
resource.
yes, in our case, we need to respect the system design of the state. So
Mhm.
we have already a base we must respect, and the thing is that the app should be 1% accessible. So that's a big challenge too. But yes, this team is really working on all that, using by respecting the design system already in place of the state and making sure that the all screens are accessible.
Okay.
when you say
Sorry,
that the
Mark.
state has a design system, are you talking about finalized CSS, for example? Like, is the state actually providing you with a library of components, or is it just a guideline in a
Yes,
document that you have to follow?
it's a library, but it's just like a library with HTML, CSS, and GS.
Mhm.
So we need to we have another library we created to build Angular component based on that design system. So this is what our first library actually we created.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. I mean, makes all sense to have them as Angular
It's
components if you only use Angular and all the micro frontends. So
yes.
yeah, it's of course
Um,
the first step for
it's
every large
it's
application, have the components ready.
Yes, it's by the way one of the difficult parts because developers are usually used to material, Angular material, PrimeNG, and things like that, where we have our component already ready. We just add a little bit of changes depending of the design, but things are already working. In our case, no, it's not. It's really not like that. We
Hmm.
need to build things, and even for a side panel, for example, it doesn't exist in the library design system library. So we need to build our own generic components, and that's
Challenging.
yeah.
How,
Yes.
how do you handle this when you notice that, or when one team notices that they are missing a crucial component? Are they just, I don't know, start to write it from scratch on their own project? Or do they actually have to
um,
delegate this to the design team, for example, and the design team
this
comes
is
up with a
a great
mock-up,
question.
implements it?
This is a great question. Well, actually, I follow all the teams, all the designs. So when I'm in each team, per team. In each meetup per team, when we are going like present what we are going to build for the next few sprints. So I like say, okay, this component I see it in this product and in this product too. So we are going to externalize this component and we are going to build it. If we have the time, actually, if I have the time, I make it. I code it in the library and publish a new version. And when the team are going to use the component, it's ready. Because the difficulty here is that it's not just a simple component. We need to make something like Angular material components, something that is generic, something that configurable and can be used by all teams and really make it generic. So this is a little bit complicated. If it's a simple component, then teams can build a component and at some point I externalize their code and put it on the library. But for some cases where we have like complex component, here it's the system team, I mean me, who's managing those kind of components.
Okay, so before we head over to Manuel, one question from the chat that also came up in our discussion about team sizes and whatnot, right? I know that we didn't have a production release yet. Nevertheless, Isidro wants to know how fast features can be deployed. I mean, up to what you now have as a, let's say, demo stage, or what, how the software development lifecycle looks from development to production release. Yeah. What do you envision, at least for the moment, I guess?
For production, we are not there yet. But for like a dev environment and integration environment and validation environment, where we have all environment sets actually in like today state, we have all environments ready. Each merge request will deploy automatically on dev environment, and we can therefore deploy on integration and start testing things. So this is how it works for all teams.
Okay. All right, then let's head over to Manuel for when we can continue the discussion later, right? For hearing a little bit about portal development. I think that touches very well what we heard so far. Might be also a little bit different approach here, but I guess also interesting.
Good. Okay, slides are working. That's perfect. Yeah, so okay, maybe a bit of a harder cut here, but let's start talking about portals and really just a different topic. So what I want to talk about today is Micro Frontends, of course, portal development, but also a Micro Frontend discovery service, which is called the feed service. And I mean, we already did introductions, but let's just really recap it quickly. I'm at Smapyot since 2017. We developed Pyro at Smapyot. We developed the Pyro feed service, which is what I'm going to talk about today. Now, portals are something that I've worked with in the past for a few years by now, and also in the context of Micro Frontends. And really, I think if you had to describe portals and their portal use cases, then what would you think about? So for me, portal really is a bit of an undefined term, because a portal can be everything depending on your application context, right? You can have context of user management. You can have a portal which is only internally used by a company that displays company statistics. You can have portals which help new employees in a company in their onboarding process. You can have portals which do monitoring. You can have portals for customers of a company where they can do self-service tasks, and so on and so on. So really, a portal can be anything and everything that you want. But really, the cool thing about a portal is that they encapsulate everything inside of one application. And I think a really prominent example here is, for example, the Azure portal. For those who have worked with Azure before, this is the Azure portal's homepage, let's say. And you can basically, as a user of Azure, manage everything related to Azure in there, right? It's one gigantic application with all the features in the world. And if you had all the time in your whole life, you would probably still not be able to click through the whole portal, because there's just so much that you can do with it. And you know, this is kind of the spirit of a portal, right? A portal unifies a lot of different features from many, many areas in one single application. And some of these features have overlap, some don't. It really depends on the context. And you know, this is a cool thing because this is kind of what micro frontends are about, right? So if you pair a portal with micro frontends, then you get to benefit from a lot of the features that micro frontends provide, right? For example, scalability, modularity, but most importantly, parallel development. Let's say, I'm in a Micro Frontends Meetup. I suppose I don't have to explain all of those benefits to you guys, but just for the completeness, I guess, if you develop a portal with 10,000 features, then you could have, in theory, one team per feature, and they could all do their own thing, and at the end deploy it into one single cohesive application, which is cool. Now, the thing about micro frontends is still that they are, of course, not just you know, the good thing. They also have some challenges that you need to work with. For example, micro frontend discovery. I think if you ask 5 micro frontend architects about discovery, you might just get 5 different answers. Now you have to handle things like versioning. You have to handle how your micro frontends are delivered to a user. You need to care about performance, ideally, about what you deliver, about how you deliver it, and also a lot of other, let's say, minor challenges, like how do you configure specific micro frontends on the front-end level, for example. And these are a lot of challenges which ideally I, as a developer, don't want to have to address if possible, because what I want to focus on is to build the product. If I'm tasked with building a portal, I'm not really tasked with building a micro frontend, but I'm tasked with creating the features, right? So the less I have to think about challenges, the better. So wouldn't it be great, really, if there was a final solution that handles those challenges on the previous slides for us? For example, micro frontend discovery. And you know, it turns out, since I'm giving this talk, that there is something. At least that's how we envision it at SmartPiot, right? Because as I said before, we delivered the Pyro feed service, which is, I'm just going to read the sentence here. The Pyro feed service provides a rich feature set for managing and orchestrating the dynamic composition of modern web applications. And you know, that's really a mouthful, but it captures kind of what the Pyro feed service does. But you know, this is still a very abstract sentence, and a demo, I guess, shows a lot more than this sentence. So what I'm going to do, and what I'm going to try today, is to demonstrate how the feed service can be used to deploy and configure a portal micro frontend application, ideally from scratch. You know, the demo gods, I hope they are with me today, because there are a lot of things that could theoretically go wrong. So if they do, bear with me. But let's start now with the practical part, which is the portal that I'm going to showcase here. And I hope you like Pokemon, because I built something in the last week, which is called the Pyro portal. And really now I'm just going to show the feature set for a moment. Can you see it? Yes, you can. That's awesome. So this is a mock-up portal. This doesn't have any meaningful functionality. Don't interpret anything really into what you can do here. It's really about transferring some concepts, right? So let's just assume that this is a company intranet portal that is not accessible to the outside, right? It's really only for us, which is, yeah, it's accessible through a VPN, for example. And I'm a company employee, and I can log in here. And let's just start logging in as somebody called Ash, which, for those of you who know Pokemon, is a normal Pokemon trainer. And I log into this portal, and I'm greeted with a dashboard. I have a very cool Pokemon quiz. Who is that Pokemon? Anybody knows the answer of you guys?
Sorry, no? I never watched that.
Oh, that's a shame.
I only say Pikachu, but it's not
Pikachu,
so I don't know.
Same for me.
that's nearly a Pikachu, so that's good.
I would always say Pikachu, and then maybe I hit it at that point.
You know, the cool thing is we can try to set this to Pikachu later on. Then you can answer the question correctly then. But for now, I guess the point really is, I, as a trainer, as a normal user, let's say, without any privileges, I'm seeing this cool quiz. I'm seeing profile information about myself. And very important, I see 2 menu entries here. And each menu entry in this application is one separate micro frontend. So if I click, for example, on the Pokédex menu entry, I am navigated to a Pokédex page, right? Which takes the time to load because we're requesting quite a bit of stuff. But this one displays all of the Pokemon that are relevant for us. And also, if I click on here, I can see some of the details. That's not even close to the whole thing. We have 150 in here, but I think we're at 1,000 Pokemon total by now. So it's really not everything.
I hope you read that out from a database, because otherwise, I mean, it's anyway impressive for a week, but anyway, so
advertising for other people's work. I'm using something that's called pokeapi.com. So this is not an API that I wrote. It's free. It's accessible for everyone. I just love it for demonstration, right? Because you have so much data that you can visually present. It's awesome. If you want something that you need for a demo, if you need some dummy data, pokeapi.co. That's awesome. Really. Where was I? In the Pokédex. Right. So really, the point of this is I'm a trader. I have no privileges. What I can do is I can see some information in this portal, right? I can also see profiles, public profiles of everyone who is registered inside this portal. For example, my own one, right? I see some information about me. That's all nice and dandy. But let's log out now and choose somebody else. Let's log in as Brock. I hope that I typed this correctly. Yes, that's good. As Brock, I am certainly in a higher role. I am certainly a gym leader. And for those who don't know Pokemon, a gym leader is somebody who can award a trader with badges when they have completed a cool challenge. So this is something that has changed from before, right? Because suddenly these badges, they were there before, but what we have now are these toggles. And I, as a gym leader, am suddenly privileged to toggle badges on and off. I mean, that didn't work, probably my internet, doesn't matter. The point is that these toggles are here, and I, as a gym leader, can suddenly do this. And these toggles here, they are also a separate micro frontend, which is only loaded when you have the correct role, which is gym leader in this case. And then we have one higher role again, which is the role of an administrator of this portal. And the administrator also has the same privileges, but also one last micro frontend, which is the user micro frontend, right? And the difference between a user and a profile really is that a user, so the thing that I'm currently showing, is, let's say, sensitive data. For example, you see here the roles of all accounts, which is something that not everybody should access, right? Only the administrator should be able to do so. Mm-hmm. I could also, if I wanted to, create users, but really that, again, is functionality that we don't care about. What we do care about is that this micro frontend is, again, only delivered to the admin. And with this covered, I guess to summarize it, we have a cool portal. We have 4 different micro frontends, right? User, profile, badge management, and Pokédex. And the question is now, how did we get this portal delivered? Before we cover this question, I want to, or basically I need to talk a bit about the tech stack that we are using for this portal. But I'm going to keep it short. Because we are Snapshot, we develop Pyro, right? We think Pyro is a cool solution for micro frontends. Of course, we are going to use our own framework here. Then I already mentioned it, the Pyro feed service is what serves as our discovery service. So this is really the central entity that I want to talk about today, the central entity that delivers our micro frontends. And we also have some backend services, which are just written in Node.js. But they don't
maybe one question, one point to clarify. I mean, I asked it as a question. Of course, I know the answer, but
good.
Do you need to use the Pyro frontend framework for using the Pyro feed service? Because they both have Pyro, of course, in the name.
No, you don't. Great question, though. But I think I have a slide about that later on. So do ask it again.
So there could be also, I don't know, choose whatever you want, and with module federation and Pyro feed service next to it, right?
Please don't ask me if I can demo it. I can't.
I don't want to demo it. I just wanted to say yes, and I'm happy.
Good.
But anyway,
I mean, if you wanted to, if you're a sadist, you could even use vanilla JavaScript, right? I guess the feed service should be able to handle it. But for this tech stack, we don't use it. I just want to have the demo running.
Sounds
good. Maybe a few words about Pyro, just so that we have some concepts out there. Pyro is a micro frontend framework, and really we have a split in the front end here, how we deploy our application. In Pyro, we have the concept of an application shell, which is essentially this red part here, right? The shell of the app. And the content inside here, the micro frontends, they are called pilot in Pyro. So whenever I'm saying pilot, I mean micro frontend. And of course, in Pyro, really, you have many micro frontends, many pilots, and you can split them however you want. It often makes sense to split them by features, or basically to align it more or less with your services that you have in the backend. But I already mentioned we have 4 pilots in our case for micro frontends. And this is all nice and fancy. Now, about a portal architecture that we are using here, I think we promised in the meetup description that this is inspired by real-world applications. So I do want to spend 1 minute on this. So when the Pokemon pilot here, Pokemon portal is of course not a real thing, but it's very close to that. if we had a real portal application that we could actually deploy for a real company, then we would probably use an architecture like this, where we have a data layer, then we have services which are kept internal and are not accessible, and then we have some front-end services which really form the bridge between the outside and the inside, right? And this proxy service, which you see here, this is basically the central thing that handles the communication between the browser and your company internal VPN, for example. So basically, whatever you request on the front end, all your micro frontends, for example, they go through the proxy service. The same goes for all API requests.
So it's like a BFF then, right? So backend for front end.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I think the only really thing is that this proxy service proxies many services. So yeah, I mean, it's still a BFF then. It's just that you have one single thing to contact.
Whatever you aggregate there as, data to your services, then yes, okay.
Exactly, yeah. And I think it makes more sense if we apply this to the Pyro portal, because this is really then the concrete implementation here. We have a browser, we have all of our pilots, our micro frontends in here, and we do have a proxy service which forwards requests to 3 services. The portal service, for example, handles things like user management, the favorite Pokemon. Then we have an asset service, which handles Pokemon images. And we have the Poke API that I already mentioned, which provides basically all the granular data that you care about. And then, and that's what I'm going to come next to, is the Pyro feed service, which does all the magic related to handling how micro frontends are delivered. And, I promised that we try to redeploy this thing. And now it gets interesting because now I need to do the right things. Because we have several challenges when we want to deploy this portal. And the first one that we need to tackle is the deployment of the app shell, really. Why? Because the app shell is really the fundamental thing that you require for loading the pilots. Because the app shell, at the end of the day, loads your micro frontends and hosts them, right? So the first thing that we need to do is we need to get this thing deployed. Per portal, you have one app shell. This thing is versioned. So if you do your updates of them, you, of course, have to be able to publish new versions. But at the end of the day, it's just a static site. And the feed service is able to host just that. The feed service is able to host static sites. Inside of our Pyro portal, it looks like this. The browser contacts the proxy service, requests our static site from the feed service, which fetches it from a CDN and delivers it to the browser. And this is something that we are going to set up now by going to the feed service.
But good. Just one question here.
Yep.
We are now doing that via the feed service, but in general, you wouldn't need to use the feed service, right? So you could host your front end anyway, essentially, right? It's I mean, the feed service makes most sense for hosting the micro frontends, and it can be used to also host the app shell, but it doesn't need to exist on the same position, right? So
that's actually something that is covered by this architecture diagram here. So if you look at the arrow here, the dash one, you see that the pilots are not loaded from the feed service. I mean, this is the pilot, but the same thing really goes for the Pyro instance as well. In this case, for example, in this conception here, the assets, any assets really are just hosted by an external CDN, I don't know, S3, blob storage, whatever. Okay. And the feed service can be used for this, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen.
Okay,
good. So, enter the feed service. I assume that nobody has seen this before. So, I need to cover one important concept about the feed service, which is the feed, which according to the name, feed service, feed, there's quite an important concept really. What is a feed? Floget, how would you describe a feed?
So I would say it's a collection of micro frontends.
Awesome. That's also what I would have said. So if you look at this is
somewhere.
I should. Right. This is the feed of the current portal deployment. And if we look at the managed micro frontends link here, we see that this feed hosts all of our 4 micro frontends. And this is it, right? It's a container of those micro frontends, and this container is then more or less able to deliver them if you request them. And this is something that we have to set up before we do anything. So the very first thing that we need to do when we want to deploy a portal is we have to create a new feed. And very important for me, I need to find a name that has never been used before, because I deleted some and managed to mess up the database because I'm stupid. So let's go with fancy portal feed. I definitely didn't use this one before. In reality, you would call this Pyro portal, for example, right? Because this is what you want to deploy here. I set the name and I create the thing. Cool. And I'm already tasked with uploading micro frontends, but this is not what you do. We want to upload the app shell instead. So we go back, click on configure static page, and then on upload page. This is basically the screen where I'm allowed to upload static assets. I'm going to set a custom asset. Version 1 is fine. Click on Next. Select my files to upload. And I already pre-built this to save some time. These are all the Portal shell assets in a release build. I'm just selecting all of them. Click on Open. Click on Next. Click on Submit. Wait a few seconds. Pray that my internet connection doesn't die. And there we go. It's uploaded. And in theory, you would now be able to access this app shell via this link. It doesn't work that way because of one particular granularity. We use a proxy service, which means that we access it through localhost 3000, and that's it. In this URL, we would have a public path of _ fancy portal feed. I didn't configure that way, which means that if we accessed the shell through this link, we would just get an empty page. So let's actually change this and make it work. We do this by going into our code. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to search for Pyro portal demo, which was the old name of the old feed. And I'm just going to replace it with, what did I call it? I think I called it fancy portal feed, right?
I think so.
Let's actually look it up. Fancy portal feed, perfect. I'm going to replace all of those. Yes. And the important part here really is that in our proxy service, which does the proxying, we now have one proxy definition, which routes everything to the static assets page that we defined before, which is this one. So if we go back, I think it rebuilt already, and then go to localhost 3000, which is our proxy service, it should be presented with this page. There we go. Now, if we log in as the admin, we see the old page, which should not be happening. I probably didn't stop this. What we expect to happen is that there was the empty shell and nothing else, right? Because you haven't actually deployed any Micro Frontends before, which is something that is going to be the next step though. Micro Frontends deployment, right? With an app shell present, we are now able to actually upload Micro Frontends. And this is a bit different to the shell because suddenly we have a one-to-many relationship because one portal really has many Micro Frontends. We have 4 in our case. Micro Frontends are also independently versioned and they need to be discoverable by the app shell. And again, this entire requirement here is covered by the concept of a feed. It's a bit different though how we request this. So if our browser really starts out, but the first thing that happens is that our browser requests the metadata of this feed. And this metadata is essentially a collection of all the pilots that are contained in this feed, all the pilots that should be delivered to the browser. This is returned to the browser, and the browser is able to fetch all of the pilots' actual assets, which are then again handled by the feed service through a CDN and returned, and then integrated into our application shell. So the question really is, how do we upload this? And there are many ways to do this. I think I already showed the UI for this. In theory, we could just go to our portal feed. We could just click on Manage Micro Frontends, and we could just click on Upload Micro Frontend. I could do this every time I want to make a redeployment, but this is not cool. It's much better if we could automate this somehow. And turns out that this is possible, but to do so, we need an API key because, of course, not everybody should be able to upload something. Instead, we need to be liable to do so. We need to have the permissions. And those are handled via API keys. So if I just go here and generate one, let's say we call this publish key, generate it, copy it. Please don't troll me, by the way. You could now go and upload things. Then we can use this API key, store it inside a configuration file, and now do the following. If we look into, for example, the user pilots package.json, we have a script which is called pack, and we have a second script which is called publish. And the publish URL here references feed.pilot/fancy portal feed, which again is the very same URL that is mentioned here for uploading Micro Frontends, right? So what we need to do is we need to open a new terminal. And first of all, we need to pack our Micro Frontends into a format which can be uploaded into the feed service. And we do this via the pack command. This will take a little while, hopefully not too long. You know, actually, I forgot one thing. We need to rebuild the entire thing first. Why do we need to do this? Because we changed the feed name.
I mean, theoretically, you could also do everything in one command because the publish has, I think, a special flag, and then it would build, it would pack, and it would actually publish. And you don't need to run three commands.
If I remember correctly, it would be -- fresh, right?
Yeah, for the publish. Yes.
For the publish.
But
No.
it's good if you show all three commands. It's also good. I mean, that's anyway what's happening under the.
True. My initial impression for separating those was to save time, but maybe it didn't.
Exactly, it's just a convenience, right? So that's why
True.
it's. And I mean, it's also good to have them separated because depending on how you set up your pipelines, you might have already the TGZ, so the tarball in your pipeline as an artifact, and then you can just throw that to a feed service, for instance. While we are anyway at it, there's also a question in the chat. First of all, there's some praise for your amazing Pokemon website.
That's
so I hope we get the code for it anyway. So that's just a remark from me. I think it would be a great demo. But anyway, the question from Simon is, why does the browser get the metadata and not the proxy service handle the version of current Micro Frontend configuration?
Well, I would say that this is not really the task of the proxy service, in my opinion. I would say that proxy service is really a very small service that is only responsible for ensuring that your requests from the outside get forwarded to the correct service on the inside. And really the entire magic of metadata processing and Micro Frontend delivery is supposed to happen on the feed services side. So in theory, you could build this entire portal without having a proxy service in the first place. And then what would you do? You only have the feed service and you only have the front end. So at some point, you have to kind of do this metadata analysis and you have to load those micro frontends. So this is not something that the proxy service should handle because you do not always have a proxy service.
Right. I mean, Simon also made an addition to it. He said that in this case, client can decide which set of microfronts it wants to get. And this can be an issue. Well, I would say the source of truth is the feed service because the client doesn't actually know what it does get, because otherwise, I mean, thinking of that, if you let the client decide, and the client is, I mean, at the end of the day, the user that's also operating it, the user always says, I'm admin. Right. So, but actually the feed service should tell you, from the token, I see you are an admin or you are a standard user, so I give you back this set. But the remark from my side, of course, always the backend needs to validate requests still, right? So you can't just let the front end decide that, we now got this functionality, so he is able to do that request. The backend still has to do such gates of approval, of course, right? So can't always just let the front end decide. It's really at the end of the day the backend that makes a decision if a request goes through or not. Source of truth for Micro Frontend composition should be the feed service, no matter how it's played out.
I think my PC is dying right now. Trust me, when I wasn't sharing my screen, this wasn't much faster. I'm considering to just go with the portal that we had deployed at this point in time. Do we want to wait 1 more minute? It's doing something.
Just one question. Maybe it will take some time. Do you have any example where you use 2 micro frontends in the same page?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, actually, this might be an advantage of still loading the old thing. The question is, can I access this right now because the service is stopped? Okay, I can. Let's go, for example, to the profiles again. Okay, yeah, I stopped the dev server, which could cause some problems. You know what? This build successfully. It told me, let's do one thing. Let's try the deployment, and if everything works, we should be able to see the portal again. Okay,
let's go like that.
Good. Let's do this. Let's do what we wanted to initially, which is packing those pilots into a format that can be deployed. And please, this should run faster now. It doesn't help that it has 31 degrees in my room. I think my
So for each micro frontend, you need to run to pack it before using it.
Exactly, but this is really only for uploading.
Before deploying it.
Yep. So this is packed basically a TZ file, and the tarball can then be uploaded. That's basically all that's happening.
It's like an npm, right? So you do the same thing. You always need to, because that's your format of transportation. It's just this tarball.
If we have the time, you can later on open it to see what it looks like, but it really is just a bundle of all the assets of the pilot, of the disk photo, basically. So it says successfully. Let's try it out. Let's go back to our feed service. Let's go to our fancy portal feed and go to manage micro frontends. And ta-da! You see it? All those micro frontends are now uploaded. All of them version 0.10, which is perfect. This is the version that we specified. And now, if we access this URL here, in the tab, we see that this, basically this is the delivery endpoint, if you will, just in a visual representation because we access it in the browser. So the feed service now says for our fancy portal feed, we deliver those 4 micro frontends. And if I start my stuff again, I'm also starting the proxy service then, and please, I hope that it accesses the right feed this time. I did change it. Then we should also be able to see our portal very soon. Let me actually keep track of the console. Starting. App crashed. Oh no. Oh, address already in use. Okay. This is very bad. I think what is happening right now is that there's a lingering process somewhere.
That's called demo.
But there is something here. There is something here. This is all that matters right now. We wanted to see a case where one microphone is included in other microphone, right?
Yes.
This is happening here, for example. So this batch here, this toggle is from another microphone. So this page here, this profile page, this is deployed by the profile pilot. But this little switch here is included as an extension from the batch management pilot.
Actually, I think it's also, if you don't have such a fancy case, always the case, because your menu is already constructed for micro frontends.
Oh, true. Yep.
That you have here home users. The micro frontend delivers, for instance, the link to users and the content what's behind users. And that's the strength here, because you didn't need to change or have any rules in the set in the app shell here for it, right? So the app shell just says there's a menu, but the content of the menu is actually derived from all the micro frontends. So if a micro frontend doesn't say, I have a component here to integrate, there is nothing, right?
Yeah. Also, the dashboard is also, each tile in the dashboard here is coming from a different micro frontend. So this, for example, is coming from the user pilot. This is calling from the profile pilot, and this is from the Pokédex pilot. All of those are basically different micro frontends. And just to confirm one thing, yeah, we still have a proxy service running in the background. So we are basically going against my old feed, against the demo feed. But I'm kind of happy that this is still running, because this does mean that we can continue demonstration, kind of. Because I wanted to show some other things as well.
It's a lingering process, actually, by the way.
Yeah, it's typical, right? You want to show something, always this random stuff happens. Try it 5 times and the 6th one fails. Well,
you should do a report.
really,
it's fine.
It's fine. We can work with that. Rule-based microphone delivery, because this is something that we can also show with the other feed. It doesn't really matter which one it really comes from. What do I mean? We have 4 pilots. And I showed this already when logging in and out with different accounts. The point really is that each pilot has a different role, right? So for example, the Pokédex pilot is accessible to every user with every role. So it's the profile pilot. Then we have the batch management pilot, which is only accessible for a gym leader or an admin. And the same, not the same, but the user pilot is also only accessible to administrators. Now, the question is, how do we set this up? In theory, we could just go inside of our code and write if user.hasRole admin, then render this in that component, right? But this would not be cool, because this would mean that we still load the entire code of those micro frontends. And this is performance-wise, for example, not a very good idea. But we do have something that is called a feed service who does discovery for us. And what does this look like? Or what does this mean? It means that our feed service is in the position to tell us, hey, you as the administrator should load only this and that pilot, or you as a trainer should not load the user pilot, for example. And this is something we can configure again inside of our feeds. So for example, if we go and look at the batch management pilot, which again was only accessible by the admin and by the gym leader, then we see that there is something called rules. And rules are what configure those delivery mechanisms, basically. For example, if I go on add new rule, I see a ton of different options based on which I can deliver a pilot, basically a micro frontend. For example, I could say, I only want to deliver this micro frontend to Chrome and Firefox users, which would be cool in some cases. Or I could say that I want to deliver it at a specific point in time only. Or in our case, we want to verify that a portal pilot is only delivered to a user with a certain role, which is, for example, in this case, the JWT role filter, where we can say that a pilot should only be delivered if a user has specific roles. And the trick here really is, if we again look at one thing, I will reload the page for a quick moment, because we did sign in, right? We have some kind of token here. And if we look at one request, I mean, you can see this, but you don't need to...
requests that we see that a little bit better, like bring it up to 180%.
I hope it works.
Yeah,
like this. Good. So what I'm looking at is the endpoint where we request our micro frontends, and what we can see is that in our request we send our JWT to the feed service, basically, right? So this is again simply a normal token, which we can even look at if we are interested. And we won't see much here, but what we do see is that this token includes our roles. So this transports the information of what our user is allowed to see. And the feed service simply interprets that token and says, okay, you as the administrator are allowed to see the pilot. And only then is it transferred to the actual portal. And again, there are tons and tons of rules here, right? You can solve them. You can even write custom ones, I think. And this is, for example, what we did here. So if you just look at the existing rule here, we see that this is exactly what the rule does. It says only deliver this pilot if you have the admin or gym leader role, which is cool.
We have also 2 more questions in the chat, so let's answer them, and then I think we are already good to go for the final discussion round.
Yep.
So if you have anything to show, it's one more thing that you can show, but first have the questions. So from Virish, what if we need to serve this from server-side rendering?
Well, Florian, I will give this question to you. What would you say? You're our server-side rendering expert here.
We can do that totally doable. Right now, of course, the default from Pyro is to do a client-side composition. You have several options to do server-side composition. We're not really happy with how it's done today, which is why some months ago, there's a recording of the Micro Frontends conference. I presented something. I also presented something in some conferences earlier this year. So long story short, what we work on in Pyro version 2 is to make this whole composition thing much cooler. You can already do it today. You just don't get much help from the tooling. So you will write something like 50 to 100 lines of code. It's not much. You can look it up already in the sample repository, and you can do then something like island architecture, for instance. So islands with micro frontends, that's fully server-side rendered, of course, fully optimized already on the server, and you bring it back. And then, of course, that whole depends on your component. So, for instance, if your micro frontends are React-based, then you can already server-side render them, maybe don't even hydrate them on the client or rehydrate them on the client, or only render them on the client depending on what kind of components they are. And for other frameworks, I mean, whatever method you want to choose. So that's all possible there. At the moment, again, it's a little bit custom code that you have to write in between. It's not much, but we want to make that much nicer. That's why we announced something at the Micro Frontends conference. I think it will be quite nice. So long story short, yes, doable. Not really a fan of how it looks right now. So there is something cool. There's already a private beta going on, and we are soon in public beta of this thing. And it will be it's not only server-side rendering, it's actually any target. It's also Electron and also things on mobile phones and all things. So quite cool stuff. But yeah, more on that in the near future. Sorry, I stole the answer to your question, but you were just pointing it to me, so that's why I had to show it. The other is actually not a real question from Alex, but just a remark. The GUI for the rule-based microphone discovery and delivery is a really cool feature of Pyro. Yeah, I mean, everything you see there, it's just the GUI. It's like the Azure portal, so there's a full API behind it, and we are API first, but we also think that having a graphical user interface helps to get the feature, to know the features, to what's there, and to just have a feel. Because if you just would hand over the API, I mean, yeah, that's one thing, but you want to see what you're doing first, and then automate maybe and play around with the API. But for us, the development is always API first. features.
There's also
API.
one more feature that I was about to show. I mean, the time is running short now, but there is one thing that is called configuration, front-end configuration. And let's actually show this right now. For example, for our Pokédex pilot, we also have a UI for configuration. For example, inside of our portal, when you go to the dashboard, you see that this Pokemon here is Slowpoke. But the pilot feed service basically has an entire API and a UI for you, where you can say, okay, I want specific configuration values, strings, numbers, JSON, for example, anything that you want. And this is basically delivered to your micro frontend when it's loaded. So this means that you can have non-technical people actually configure your UI to some degree, which is cool and really means that you don't need to redeploy your entire frontend for one minor change. For example, if we just changed this one to 1, saved it, then our Pokemon of the day should ideally change to Bulbasaur, right? Which is really no redeployment. Non-technical people can do it. That's awesome. Yeah, I wanted to do Pikachu, but
there you always have Bulbasaur. But I mean, what's the index for Pikachu? Put it, and I will guess Pikachu.
No, it would be cool if you had a Pokédex here where we could look it up, right?
Okay.
It's only it loaded. It's 25. I should have known that. You want a Pikachu? I give you a Pikachu. Okay. Good. Let's actually cut it short then from my side. There is one last thing that I want to mention again, and I go back to the slides here. And I concluded, and we have some minutes left for discussion. Skip. Framework independence. Florian already asked about this. I used Pyro for this entire demonstration because we built Pyro and we want to use it. But the feed service is independent of Pyro. This is just a screenshot from the discovery URLs that you see from a feed. And all of those things that are listed here are basically different options of how you can consume the feed service. Plus, you have the entire REST API that the feed service provides, for example, for configuration, for other features like feature flags, right? Feed fusion, all of those features, they are accessible to other microphones as well. If you have something related to module federation, great. We've got you covered here. So just because it's called Pyro, don't think about you need Pyro as a baseline, as a foundation, right? Pyro is really just a brand that we develop at SmartYod, but the feed service is kind of self-sufficient. It works great with Pyro, with the Pyro frontend framework, but it really is not a requirement. Right, and I think let's cut it short here. We skipped one thing, but that doesn't really matter. Yeah, my screen share is done, Florian. If you want to have the discussion, then.
Yeah, I would appreciate it. Maybe let's start with the burning question that I didn't get an answer so far. Will we see this demo on GitHub?
that's kind of the plan.
Didn't forget.
You know,
yes, me too, actually. I want to see an example, the code example, where you have a page with different micro frontends, how you load them. I'm interested, and I don't know about Pyro actually, and I think it's interesting because it provides an interface where you can add micro frontends, but I'd like also to know what are its limitations, why going for Pyro and not like module federation with just Angular. I don't know if you have
Manuel, what's your perspective on this?
So
yes.
I need to be careful now because we develop Pyro, right?
No. I mean, be honest about it, right? So I mean, you I think use it dominantly in React-based projects, but you, for instance, were also working in the past, I think, in projects where Angular, for instance, was used. I mean, that for instance, that from a mixed technology point of view, but you also know then. I mean, this one project where Angular was used, there wasn't used Pyro, right? But you know the ins and outs, therefore, from a developer perspective. So therefore, just go ahead. What do you think?
I think the most prominent disadvantage, especially for your case, if you love Angular, is that currently, at this point in time, Pyro is based in React predominantly. So the app shell, for example, is written in React, and I think it's React only, right? Unless you do some kind of some workarounds, I'd say. Yes,
I mean, surely you could use some workarounds. That's also one of the things we want to change in version 2, that you can, for the app shell, be a little bit more free. There are, of course, some, let's say, more or less official approaches that you can take without tinkering too much. So one thing, for instance, that we quite often see in the wild is layout pilot, so that some team makes just, they say, we want to use Pyro, but we don't want to use React. So we just make our layout for a dedicated pilot, which is isolated, which just uses Angular, for example, technology. But yeah, that's of course the most often seen approach. But better would of course be that they say, yeah, I already use Angular in my app shell directly, and we hear you there. So it will come. It's also one of the features of version 2. Yeah, but it's definitely a disadvantage if you're not React-based. If you're React-based, it's great already, right? Because you start already with the...
Even if you do want to use Angular, it's not like it's not impossible, right? You can write your app shell in React, but still write your individual micro frontends, your pilots in Angular. That is already out of the box supported, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have really large projects with Angular. So Angular is by far the most, let's say, used converter for components, because if, I mean, as Fatima said, it's really loved by large corporations. It brings a lot of features. So yeah, and therefore, of course, it's needed. But go on with advantages and disadvantages. I think also React is certainly that you need to use it for the app shell as the most dominant disadvantage. The other might be on the server-side rendering, but I think, so if you're using anyway, for instance, module federation, you're also client-side driven, unless you opt into something like module federation for Next.js. So, but then it's really a specific subset, and that doesn't fit well with, for instance, an Angular world or something. So there is really limitation. So we usually say that module federation is a tool. It's a little bit, let's say, as an analogy, it's like Docker. It's also a tool. It handles, like Docker handles a certain thing, where it doesn't handle everything end to end. Pyro is more like a framework. So Pyro is maybe like Kubernetes, right? So Pyro really provides you with all the orchestration, everything it tries to do end to end. But yeah, at the end, what runs the domain-specific code, that's always up to you. But yeah, so Pyro is a little bit like Kubernetes, and module federation would be a little bit like Docker in this analogy, but don't give too much on that analogy. It's a little bit like you can think about it, right? And by the way, you could also use, like you can use Kubernetes with Docker. This is one of the often, you can use Pyro with module federation. Just by default, we don't use this because Pyro is independent of the tooling. So you could use it with any bundler, for instance, ESBuild, or I don't know, Byte, or you come up with something. I think we have 7 or 8 bundlers that we already support officially, but you can just write your own integration. Usually these are just, I don't know, 20 lines of code or something. And if we could go for module federation out of the box, it would be Webpack 5, and that's it, right? And that's why we didn't go for it. But if you, let's say, already know that all your teams are using Webpack 5, well, you can in your app shell already say the dependencies that are shared centrally from there are shared via module federation. And in all your microphones, you could also say, I'm using module federation for this to then receive, of course, the shared dependency and to distribute more dependencies there. And I think we also have a sample out there with this, and it works.
Okay.
But it's not the default, because again, then it wouldn't be tooling independent. So if your team makes the choice, it's there. Yeah. Maybe to spun up the... So, I mean, the discussion is actually general, so we can go in any direction. One question from the chat from Simon. What if we have 2 micro frontends that should share some data on a page? Does Pyro provide opportunity to select some parameters to share?
So I'm not quite sure what you mean with select some parameters to sharing. But maybe generally, Pyro does provide you with opportunities to share data and state. For example, a prominent example at the Pyro portal was the user. When you log in initially, you have central user data that needs to be accessible to every pilot. And that user data is, for example, stored inside of a global state container, which is accessible to every pilot. And every pilot could also, with some APIs, write to that state container in theory. But also, at the end of the day, every Pyro app is really just a JavaScript app. So if you wanted to, you could just go with global variables or global state containers that are shared and accessed from every pilot. So really, your imagination is the limit, let's say. Whatever you want. For example,
have a shared dependency that uses there a singleton pattern or anything like that, right? So anything works. And Pyro, of course, makes use of these extension components as well. Don't forget that. It's like web components, just very generic.
Another example where we kind of go out of sight the bounds of Pyro here is for the Python portal, I use the SWR library for doing network requests, which has a central cache basically for all the data that was requested. This is not, say, natively integrated into Pyro, but it's very easy to set up with Pyro, if you get what I mean. So this is, we don't really have an official plugin, for example, but it's a few lines of code, and this thing is running with a central cache, and all of requests from different pilots, they are handled properly and share the same state, which is really cool then. Yep.
Right. And we are almost at the end of time. Maybe one last question from me to both of you. Now, I mean, we heard a lot about multi-repo and mono-repo approach. What would you say is the, I mean, we already heard also about advantages and disadvantages, but what is the, that is now interesting, biggest challenge that you need to overcome to make this multi-repo approach work for micro frontends, in your opinion? Or, I mean, not necessarily challenge that you had to overcome, but because maybe it was already from the architecture, whatever you've chosen, but that you see needs to be overcome. So whatever solution you pick, this solution needs to have this box checked, right?
The big challenge, I'd say it's whenever we test the integration of micro frontends, there will be surprises because we share some dependencies. Maybe this will work or not. Maybe there is some dependencies which are not compatible with model federation. I've experimented this already. There is not a lot of documentation, you know. A monorepo exists everywhere. There is great documentation, great tutorials, videos, etc. On multi-repo, I find nothing. So it's really like looking why it's not work, going like looking everywhere, etc. So there is always surprises, and there is always like looking for a workaround because libraries are not supporting module federation. There is like, yeah, each time there is a surprise. So this is why it's more difficult with multi-repo.
I see.
I would probably go in the same direction, really. I think the fundamental problem really is probably not what you were getting at, but I'd say communication between all the teams. Because if the communication doesn't go right, then the project doesn't go right. And I think a monorepo to some degree kind of catches these issues because you build the entire repo in most cases, and then if some miscommunication occurred and some breaking changes occurred, then this is usually caught at some point in time. But this is very much different to multi-repos, where you have one team doing changes in a central part that is totally unrelated to some other part that kind of uses it. And then you really get in trouble. For example, if you have some shared components and someone introduces a breaking change, it will take a while to actually surface in a multi-repo approach, right? Because this change will have to be pulled from a package registry, for example, and that will take some time to really occur. And I think this is something that could be avoided with a monorepo rather easily.
Not really for like the product on itself, because it's we avoid coupling. There is no micro frontend that integrates another micro frontend. We avoid this. Maybe the problem would be something shared, a library, components, things like that. When there is something which is broken somewhere, we would identify it right way in a monorepo. But in terms of like coordination between teams, like the product on itself, the feature on itself, it's really separate. There is times where we need to communicate, for example, when for the team, allowance team needs to communicate with control and payment teams. So it gets the payments of a citizen. So in this case, yes, we need to coordinate, but it's really not that complex. There is just like, I will give me a link to your micro frontend and an ID, and then I receive it. It's like application. It receives a route, and then it goes and loads the component with its data. So we avoid really coupling things. This is really something that we definitely don't want to do.
I mean, Pyro in general only makes loose coupling, so therefore you can't even couple to micro frontends in that way, right? So I think what Manuel was going for was also just, a shared dependency, like a library there, or maybe even a loose coupling scenario might have, the input of some data that the format changes somewhere, right? And then the receiving component interprets that differently for whatever reason, or wants a different format or so. Because even in loose coupling, right? So for instance, events also loose coupling. But if the event sender somehow, for some reason, changes the structure of the event arguments, right? So all the receivers, all the listeners, they also need to be either made aware of that or have defensive programming in place to, don't react them to it, right? And just shut down. But then this is about the teams that actually create these components, that whatever they receive or whatever team that creates these listeners in the event scenario, right? Whoever receives that, they always need to have defensive programming mechanisms applied. Otherwise, it doesn't work. I mean, but that's the general problem with distributed computing. You always need to be defensive because you never know about your inputs, right? So when they come from someone else, if they're not in your hands, they're by definition illegal. So you need to check them if they're legal. It's as simple as that. Yeah.
When they are all integrated, you will check it right away. You will see if it breaks or not.
That is the ultimate thing then, testing, right? So either you make
Yes.
some interface tests or in the end, of course, end-to-end tests, but they need to be in place, and best case also on an isolated basis that you can say this micro frontend is, for instance, behaving not as it should be. But this is, I think, the one challenge that I see, at least in the projects where I am at, that testing of these things becomes crucial, and of course, it becomes exponential, and you need, of course, to decide then what is in this coursing where I can make most facts out of it and say, oh, now I know what's going wrong with the least amount of work, because you can spend an infinite amount of work on testing and then refactoring testing, and it never stops. But you need to be practical here and make a good decision to have a level at the end of the day where you can make judgments.
It's double testing the application alone and then testing the integration of the whole thing. So yes, it's definitely one of the challenges. Yes.
Great. So looking at the time, we're a little bit over time, but as usual, that's fine. We're having great discussion. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing your projects. Manuel, I want to see that on GitHub too.
We are waiting.
Make it possible.
Otherwise, I wish
That's
you all
That's a
pleasant day.
Same to you. Thanks for hosting this.
Yes, thanks a lot. That was a really great conversation.
Thanks for joining. Have a great end of the week. TGIF tomorrow, right? And then see you all soon. Thanks everyone for joining as guests, for posting your messages, and see you next month. Next Micro Frontends Meetup. Thanks everyone.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.